In a village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, where cobblestone streets wound like silver ribbons and smoke curled lazily from chimneys, a young girl lived with her modest family. The village itself was quaint yet tightly bound by tradition and gossip. Every corner, every lane carried stories of old grievances, triumphs, and mischief. Among the villagers, the girl was known for her gentle spirit, her kindness, and the quiet light she seemed to carry wherever she went. But as with all tales of grace and virtue, she was not without her adversaries. A group of women, wealthy and envious, observed her growing reputation with thinly veiled malice. They whispered behind fans, exchanged secretive glances, and plotted in shadowed rooms, their envy simmering with each compliment the girl received or favor she earned. The event that would forever mark the girl's story occurred on the eve of the annual ball, the most anticipated gathering in the village. The young woman had been preparing a gown of delicate fabric and shimmering colors, painstakingly sewn and adorned with lace and beads, reflecting both her careful taste and the skill of her family. Word of the dress had spread through the village, as news of beauty and grace always did, igniting the jealousy of those who could not bear to be overshadowed. Late in the night, under the cover of darkness, the malicious women struck. They crept into the girl's room, carrying flasks of oil and kindling, and set the gown ablaze. The flames consumed the delicate fabric in moments, leaving only ashes, smoke, and the acrid smell of burnt cloth. The act was swift, cruel, and deliberate, designed to rob her of dignity, confidence, and presence at the grand event. The next morning, news of the sabotage spread quickly. Villagers emerged from their homes, murmuring in shock and pity. Mothers clutched their children to their breasts, shopkeepers paused in their work, and neighbors gathered in small, whispering clusters. All eyes were on the girl, whose expression remained calm but whose heart pounded with sorrow and disbelief. Some sought to offer comfort, bringing blankets or words of sympathy, but the sense of injustice weighed heavily upon the village. The act was not just personal, it seemed to symbolize the envy and cruelty that existed in human hearts, and the villagers could not help but feel a mixture of horror and helplessness at witnessing it. Then, as twilight settled across the village and shadows lengthened, something miraculous occurred. From the ashes of the burned gown rose a soft, flickering glow that grew steadily, coalescing into the outline of the dress itself. But this was no ordinary garment. The flames that composed it did not burn her or the floor beneath her. They danced gently, alive with color and light, swirling as though in harmony with her very presence. The dress shimmered with an inner fire, illuminating her face and casting a warm, ethereal glow across the gathered villagers. The fire did not consume, it transformed. It was as though the dress itself had absorbed the injustice and hatred it had endured and returned purified, radiant, and unstoppable. As she stepped into the village square, the flames followed her like a living cloak. They moved and swirled around her, accentuating her movements, highlighting her grace, and giving her an aura of power that no ordinary gown could provide. Villagers gasped in awe and admiration, unable to look away. Even the once malicious women recoiled, their expressions twisting in fear, humiliation, and disbelief. They had sought to diminish her, yet the very act of cruelty had instead enhanced her beauty and presence, demonstrating the reversal of power that often occurs in tales of moral justice. By the time the ball began, the girl entered the grand hall enveloped in her fiery gown. The flames continued to shimmer harmlessly, reflecting off mirrors and crystal chandeliers, leaving onlookers spellbound. She moved through the crowd with a quiet confidence, her every gesture commanding attention without arrogance. The rivals who had once plotted against her shrank back, humiliated and exposed, while other villagers whispered of the miraculous transformation they had witnessed. The girl danced, smiled, and conversed with grace, embodying the truth that cruelty cannot tarnish the spirit of one who possesses innate dignity. News of the fiery dress spread quickly, carried from village to village, growing with each retelling. Children repeated the story at hearths, mothers whispered it to daughters, and travelers carried the legend beyond the hills and forests, embellishing and amplifying its wonder. Over time, the tale became more than a story of one girl's triumph. It was a testament to the resilience of character, the reversal of envy through courage, and the power of moral and spiritual justice. The flames themselves came to symbolize more than beauty. They represented endurance, dignity, and the truth that genuine grace shines brightest when challenged by cruelty. Thus, the girl's legend endured, whispered from generation to generation. She became a symbol of strength, a reminder that even when forces of envy and malice strike with full intensity, the inner light of virtue and courage cannot be destroyed. The fiery dress was no longer simply a garment but an emblem of justice, of transformation, and of the unassailable spirit of those who face wrongdoing with grace and unwavering dignity. In the heart of a village bound by rigid social expectations and the quiet scrutiny of neighbors, a young woman prepared for the annual ball. Her gown, carefully chosen and crafted, was more than just fabric and thread. It was an extension of herself, a statement of identity, autonomy, and personal expression. Each bead sewn onto the bodice, each fold of silk, reflected her taste, her effort, and her right to exist visibly in a society that often tried to dictate the terms of women's appearance and behavior. The gown was her voice in a place that frequently sought to silence women through gossip, subtle restrictions, and the careful policing of conduct. To wear it boldly was to assert a presence, to declare that she would not be rendered invisible by tradition, envy, or the arbitrary judgments of others. But envy and control are persistent forces, and there were those in the village who could not bear to see her claim her space so openly. A group of women, steeped in jealousy and invested in maintaining their own power within the village hierarchy, decided to intervene. Under the cloak of darkness, they broke into her room, pouring oil and fire onto the gown. The flames devoured the dress swiftly, reducing it to a heap of smoldering ash. This act of sabotage was more than mere mischief. It was a symbolic attempt to erase her presence, to deny her visibility, and to assert dominance over her autonomy. In one deliberate gesture, the aggressors sought to control not just her appearance but the narrative of her life, attempting to silence her through humiliation and deprivation. Yet the village, and perhaps the universe itself, bore witness to an unexpected reversal. From the ashes of the destroyed dress emerged a flame-woven garment, alive with fire that did not burn the wearer but instead moved in harmony with her body and aura. The flames traced her contours, wrapping around her like a living cloak, illuminating her face and presence with radiant energy. What had been intended to diminish her became the very medium through which she reclaimed agency, demonstrating that the power to assert oneself cannot be extinguished by malice. In this moment, humiliation transformed into empowerment. The girl's identity, previously threatened by envy and sabotage, now radiated with undeniable force. The act of the dress returning in flames was itself a powerful statement, a challenge to the social structures that had long sought to control female expression. It signified the resilience of the individual against forces that attempt to dictate the boundaries of appearance, behavior, and recognition. For the villagers who watched, the transformation carried a lesson. Efforts to erase, diminish, or regulate women's identities may provoke a response both unexpected and transformative. The fire that enveloped the gown became an emblem of resistance, a reminder that true expression cannot be contained or destroyed by external forces. Viewed through a contemporary lens, the story resonates with modern struggles surrounding female representation, autonomy, and societal policing. Women across the world continue to face pressures to conform to narrow standards of beauty, behavior, and visibility. Public shaming, criticism, and attempts to suppress individuality are commonplace, whether through social commentary, institutional rules, or cultural expectations. The girl's fiery dress symbolizes the reclamation of power in the face of such suppression. It is the assertion that self-expression, whether in dress, speech, or action, is a fundamental form of resistance against systemic control. Her transformation serves as a metaphor for countless instances in which women have reclaimed spaces, voices, and rights that others sought to deny them. Beyond the individual, the tale functions as a coded narrative of resistance, highlighting the dynamics of envy, judgment, and patriarchal control. The women who burned the dress represent forces that attempt to constrain, to enforce conformity, and to assert dominance through shame. The girl's triumph demonstrates that identity and autonomy are not fragile, they endure and, when challenged, may emerge even stronger. The story emphasizes that empowerment often comes not through confrontation alone but through the reclamation of visibility, the confident assertion of self, and the subversion of attempts to diminish one's presence. The moral of the narrative is clear and enduring. Personal expression and identity cannot be destroyed by envy, malice, or societal constraint. The flames of the returned dress are not simply fire, they are a symbol of agency, of the indomitable spirit of women who refuse to be silenced, and of the transformative power that emerges when oppression is confronted with resilience. Through the lens of feminist symbolism, the tale demonstrates that autonomy, dignity, and creative expression are intertwined, and that attempts to suppress them inevitably awaken forces of reclamation and empowerment. In the generations that followed, the story of the fiery dress became more than a tale of magic. It became a lesson in resistance, a parable about the enduring strength of selfhood. Mothers told it to daughters, storytellers shared it in village squares, and scholars could recognize its echoes in the broader history of women asserting their rights and presence. The flames became synonymous with courage and empowerment, a visible, unmistakable reminder that while envy may attempt to destroy, the essence of autonomy and identity will always rise, unscathed and radiant, like fire itself. In a village perched on the edge of misty cliffs, where fog clung to crooked houses and twisted trees, life was as gloomy as the perpetual overcast sky. The villagers moved cautiously through narrow, uneven streets, aware that isolation bred fear as easily as it bred community. Among them lived a young woman whose beauty and quiet confidence had drawn the envy of a small circle of women, whose whispers and shadowed glances carried malice. Their envy had festered over seasons, each compliment paid to the girl twisted into resentment, until it hardened into a deliberate, sinister plan. The night of the ball arrived under a turbulent sky. Thunder rolled across the hills, and lightning etched jagged patterns over the rooftops. The young woman had prepared a gown that reflected both elegance and her own careful artistry, a shimmering ensemble she had poured her heart into. The jealous rivals, cloaked in darkness and secrecy, crept into her chamber while the storm raged outside. They set the gown ablaze with flasks of oil, their eyes gleaming with triumph as the fabric curled into blackened ash. The flames cast macabre shadows on the walls, and the girl stood frozen in shock, the acrid smoke stinging her eyes as her creation was destroyed. The act was not mere envy, it was a ritualistic attempt to annihilate her presence, to erase her from the night entirely. But the village, steeped in unseen forces and long-held secrets, did not permit such cruelty to go unchecked. From the ashes of the burned gown, flames arose, coalescing into the shape of the dress itself, yet no longer tethered to the laws of nature. They shimmered with spectral light, moving independently as if alive, licking the air around her without consuming it. The flames twisted and turned, wrapping around her with a will of their own, casting a haunting glow that illuminated her face in sharp, ethereal relief. The girl herself became uncanny in appearance, untouchable, empowered, a figure whose beauty and menace intertwined so completely that it was impossible to look upon her without trembling. The rivals, once confident in their malice, were the first to suffer the effects of the supernatural fire. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, whispers of the girl's laughter or soft chanting filled empty rooms, and small, inexplicable phenomena occurred wherever they went. Doors slammed shut on their own, mirrors reflected distorted visions, and fleeting figures darted in corners of their eyes. Their fear grew into terror, consuming their minds and unraveling their composure. The village, already dark and isolating, seemed to lean in closer, complicit in magnifying the dread, as if the air itself carried the weight of justice. As the girl moved through the village, the flames followed her like loyal guardians. Her presence became both beacon and omen. Those who witnessed her were struck by awe, fear, and a deep, instinctive understanding that she was no ordinary human. She walked untouchable, her gaze meeting those of villagers and rivals alike, leaving impressions of power and judgment that could not be spoken of but were understood. The jealous women became shadows of themselves, their confidence replaced by paranoia, their whispers turned into trembling pleas for escape that found no audience. Over the ensuing nights, the village itself seemed haunted. Travelers reported strange lights in windows long abandoned, unexplained movements in the streets, and a persistent hum, like fire crackling in impossible places. Some villages disappeared, vanishing without trace, leaving empty homes and whispers of punishment for those who dared harbor envy or cruelty. The girl's presence, mediated through the spectral flames, reshaped the village's reality. It became a place where the ordinary and supernatural intertwined, where fear and fascination coexisted, and where malice could never again go unpunished. The climax of the tale arrives as the girl herself vanishes one night, stepping into her gown of living flames. The fire swirled around her, lifting her above the ground and carrying her away into the stormed sky, leaving behind only embers and whispers that would haunt the village forever. Though she departed, the legend of the fiery dress endured, a story told in hushed tones by firesides and marketplace corners alike. The flames became symbolic, a living warning that cruelty and envy against those who carry inner strength and grace would awaken forces beyond comprehension, forces that moved with intention and memory. Generations later, villagers still recounted the tale of the girl in the fiery dress, describing the spectral flames that followed her, the uncanny way she had walked untouched by harm, and the terror she invoked in those who sought to destroy her. Her presence, though ephemeral, became an enduring mark on the collective memory of the village, a reminder that power, justice, and vengeance could manifest in ways both terrifying and beautiful. The supernatural fire, independent and sentient, became emblematic of moral reckoning, illustrating that acts of envy and cruelty against those who deserve respect could never remain unanswered. Thus, the story lingered like smoke in the foggy village, a Gothic narrative of vengeance, transformation, and supernatural justice. It captured the imagination of villagers, travelers, and storytellers, binding the memory of the girl and her living flames to the landscape itself, so that even centuries later, when the wind swirled through the streets and the fog thickened, one might glimpse the shimmering outlines of fire dancing through the village, a warning that evil actions, particularly those born of envy and malice, awaken forces that cannot be tamed or forgotten. In a village shaped by centuries of rigid tradition and social hierarchy, women were constantly reminded of their place through both subtle and overt mechanisms of control. Gossip, judgment, and public scrutiny were constant companions, but for some, these tools of power manifested in acts of deliberate humiliation. One such act occurred on the eve of the village's grand ball, a celebration that drew attention, admiration, and status to those who participated. A young woman, admired for her grace and careful attention to her appearance, had prepared a gown that reflected her skill, her taste, and her dignity. The gown was a manifestation of her identity and agency in a society that often sought to constrain women to prescribed roles. Among her peers, envy simmered. A group of women, invested in maintaining dominance within the social order and fearful of her rising presence, plotted to sabotage her. They infiltrated her quarters under the cover of night, doused the gown with oil, and set it ablaze. The fire consumed the delicate fabric in moments, leaving nothing but smoke, ash, and the acrid scent of destruction. To the onlookers, this was not merely the destruction of a dress, it was an attempt to diminish the girl's visibility, to erase her presence, and to remind all women of the consequences of exceeding the bounds of expectation. The villagers reacted with a mixture of shock, pity, and a quiet acknowledgement that such acts had precedent, recalling similar punishments in history, women accused of witchcraft who had their heads shaved or garments burned, or those exiled from towns for perceived transgressions. Yet history often carries lessons of unintended consequences. From the ashes of the destroyed gown arose a phenomenon both miraculous and symbolic. The dress returned, engulfed in flames that did not harm the wearer but instead enhanced her presence. The fire was radiant, moving with a life of its own, and it transformed the girl into a figure of undeniable power. To the villagers, the event mirrored historical accounts in which women, despite attempts to suppress, shame, or punish them, found ways to reclaim authority and respect. The fire became a symbol of resistance, a visible manifestation of defiance against those who sought to enforce societal limitations through cruelty. The villagers' reaction revealed much about societal complicity. Many had long accepted acts of public humiliation as customary or even necessary, believing that women should remain within prescribed limits. Witnessing the miraculous return of the dress challenged these assumptions. Fear, awe, and admiration mingled in the crowd. Those who had once conspired or stood silent were forced to confront the moral implications of their actions. The fire and the girl's transformed presence acted as a moral mirror, reflecting the consequences of envy and oppression back upon those who had perpetrated or condoned them. In this way, the narrative served as both a recounting of historical practices and a commentary on human behavior, demonstrating that acts intended to suppress are often inverted by justice, creativity, and resilience. Historically, women who exceeded social expectations, through skill, beauty, intellect, or influence, were frequently punished under the guise of morality or propriety. Witch trials, social exiles, and class-based sanctions served to remind them of their proper roles. The story of the burned dress evokes these patterns, illustrating how attempts to control women often provoke unintended consequences. In the tale, the dress and the fire together symbolize not only resistance to oppression but also the enduring capacity for moral justice to correct imbalance. It becomes clear that the flames are more than magic, they represent the human tendency to reclaim agency, to rise despite the forces that seek to diminish visibility, and to assert identity and dignity in defiance of suppression. As the girl walked among the villagers, the flames traced her every movement, emphasizing the reversal of power. Those who had sought to humiliate her were now diminished, exposed to the moral weight of their actions, and confronted with the futility of cruelty. The event transcended the individual act of vengeance, becoming a reflection of broader struggles for recognition and autonomy throughout history. It mirrored not only past acts of societal control but also ongoing patterns in which women navigate attempts to erase their achievements or presence. The moral of the story is clear: attempts to shame, humiliate, or control women often backfire, producing results that amplify rather than diminish the victim's power. The fiery dress becomes a symbol of resilience, illustrating that societal forces, no matter how entrenched, cannot permanently suppress dignity, creativity, or autonomy. By connecting the miraculous transformation of the gown to historical and cultural patterns of female oppression, the tale serves as a reminder of the enduring relevance of justice, empowerment, and recognition in the face of systemic attempts to control and erase. In the generations that followed, the story was retold as a lesson about resilience and moral justice. Villagers spoke of the girl and her fiery dress, weaving her story into the fabric of local history, much as tales of witch trials, exiled women, and punished innovators had endured over time. The legend became a testament to the power of standing firm, reclaiming one's identity, and asserting autonomy even when the world attempts to strip it away. Flames, in this narrative, are not only literal but symbolic. They are the spark of defiance that persists through oppression, a visible, radiant assertion that identity and agency cannot be destroyed. In a village where appearances carried weight as heavily as deeds, a young woman's gown was more than just clothing. It was a tangible expression of her identity, confidence, and personal value. Each seam, each delicate embellishment, reflected not only her taste but also her sense of self, a declaration that she existed with dignity and purpose in a world quick to judge, constrain, or diminish her. In such a society, where social pressures whispered constantly and expectations pressed on individuals like invisible chains, the act of presenting oneself, particularly a woman, was both an assertion of autonomy and a subtle act of defiance. Her gown, chosen and prepared with care, symbolized this assertion, carrying her presence beyond the confines of her home and into the public sphere of the village's grand ball. Yet envy and societal pressure were forces as tangible as the gown itself. A group of women, driven by jealousy and motivated by a need to enforce conformity, conspired to destroy her. Under the cover of night, they infiltrated her chamber and set the gown ablaze, reducing it to smoldering ash and the acrid smell of burnt fabric. Their action was not merely physical, it was psychological in scope. The destruction of the dress represented an attempt to strip her of self-worth, to undermine her confidence, and to erase the visible markers of her identity. It was an externalization of both their own envy and the internalized societal pressures that taught women to police one another, to fear visibility, and to see individuality as a threat. From the ashes, however, the gown returned in flames, fiery, vivid, and alive. The fire did not consume her. Instead, it wrapped around her body in a spectral, yet protective embrace, moving independently as though guided by an unseen consciousness. This miraculous transformation can be interpreted as the manifestation of her subconscious desire for justice and transformation. Where the conscious mind saw loss and humiliation, the psyche responded with resilience, constructing an image of power and reclamation. The returning dress was a projection of inner strength externalized, a visual and psychological statement that identity and dignity cannot be fully destroyed by external forces, no matter how cruel. The rivals, who had orchestrated the sabotage, became subjects of their own psychological torment. Shadows of doubt and guilt crept into their minds, hallucinations appearing in reflective surfaces, whispers in empty corridors, and the sensation of invisible eyes watching their every move. They began to see the girl's image in flames when no fire burned, hear her voice echoing softly yet clearly when no one spoke. Paranoia overtook them, eroding their composure and unsettling the certainty with which they had acted. The horror they experienced was psychological, yet profoundly real, illustrating how malice, when met with moral or symbolic power, often rebounds on the instigator in ways that the conscious mind struggles to explain. Meanwhile, the girl moved through the village with a newfound sense of empowerment. Each step in her flame-wrapped gown was an act of confrontation and reclamation. She embodied the principle that facing adversity directly, especially the deliberate attempts of others to diminish her, was essential to self-realization. The flames of her dress were both shield and weapon, a visible manifestation of psychological resilience and moral vindication. They allowed her to navigate spaces once dominated by envy and fear with confidence and control, signaling to all observers that attempts to destroy or diminish her could only enhance her power. The story functions on multiple psychological levels. On one hand, it illustrates the external pressures women face from peers and society alike, the constant threat of comparison, judgment, and sabotage. On the other, it demonstrates how internal resources, subconscious strength, moral clarity, and resilience, can transform perceived defeat into empowerment. The returning dress in flames symbolizes the mind's capacity to reclaim agency and assert identity, a striking reversal in which humiliation becomes a catalyst for psychological and moral transformation. The villagers, witnessing these events, could not ignore the psychological weight of what occurred. They observed envy and malice confronted by resilience and justice, and even those with no direct involvement felt the tremors of moral clarity and karmic resolution. The act of sabotage, intended to diminish, became a teaching moment. Confronting attempts to erase, belittle, or control one's identity is not only necessary but transformative. Psychological horror and empowerment existed in parallel, illustrating that the mind is both battleground and sanctuary in the struggle for self-definition. By the night of the ball, the girl's flame-wrapped presence was a spectacle both terrifying and awe-inspiring. She moved among the villagers with dignity, her body surrounded by undulating fire, her gaze calm and unassailable. The rivals shrank back, powerless in the face of their own projected fears and the undeniable assertion of the girl's identity. Her journey from humiliation to empowerment demonstrated that self-realization requires acknowledgement, confrontation, and the reclamation of agency even in the most hostile circumstances. Ultimately, the tale of the fiery dress endures as a psychological parable. It teaches that identity, confidence, and personal value are not fragile commodities to be destroyed by external cruelty. Attempts to impose humiliation, envy, or societal control may catalyze inner strength, and when this strength manifests, it is both visible and transformative. The returning flames are symbolic of resilience, justice, and the mind's capacity to convert adversity into empowerment. The girl's experience serves as a timeless reminder that the journey toward self-realization often passes through trials designed to test, diminish, and intimidate, but that true identity and personal power are indestructible, emerging ever brighter when confronted by threat and malice. In a contemporary town caught between old traditions and the pressures of modern life, a young woman became a figure of quiet attention, admired not only for her elegance but for her courage in expressing herself freely. She had chosen a dress for the upcoming gala that was more than just a gown. It was a declaration of identity, autonomy, and freedom of expression. Each color, stitch, and embellishment reflected her personality and the choices she had made for herself, rather than the expectations imposed upon her by family, peers, or society at large. In many ways, the gown became her voice, visible and vibrant, in a world that often sought to moderate women's presence and opinions. Yet, there were those who could not tolerate her self-expression. A group of envious or socially conservative figures, women and men alike, plotted to suppress her voice, to diminish the visibility she had earned through grace and self-assurance. Under cover of night, they broke into her room and set her gown ablaze, ensuring it would be destroyed before the gala. The act was deliberate and cruel, intended to humiliate her and send a broader message. Bold self-expression, particularly by women, would not be tolerated. They believed that by destroying her dress, they could silence her presence, extinguish her confidence, and reaffirm the social hierarchy that privileged conformity over individuality. But the story did not end in humiliation. From the ashes, the gown returned, enveloped in flames that moved independently yet harmlessly, wrapping around her body like a living extension of her spirit. The fire was radiant and mesmerizing, a visual statement of resistance, defiance, and empowerment. The miraculous transformation of the dress was captured on smartphones by witnesses and quickly shared across social media platforms, where it spread like wildfire. Images and videos of the girl in the fiery gown became symbols of courage and resilience, inspiring outrage at the malicious act and admiration for her audacity. The gown, once intended to be destroyed, became a global emblem of self-expression and defiance against oppression. Artists and allies everywhere amplified the message. Street murals depicted the fiery gown, sculptures captured the undulating flames, and fashion designers drew inspiration from its symbolism. Online campaigns celebrated the girl's courage, framing her as a modern activist whose personal assertion of freedom had challenged societal norms and structures of envy and oppression. The gown, no longer merely clothing, became a rallying point for discussions about autonomy, visibility, and resistance to arbitrary censorship, both online and in real-world communities. The original oppressors, who had sought to erase her presence, soon faced widespread backlash. Social media campaigns, public criticism, and the court of public opinion turned against them, exposing their envy and malice. The humiliation they had intended for the girl instead became a mirror, reflecting their cruelty and revealing their inability to tolerate individuality. In some cases, their positions or influence eroded under the combined weight of societal condemnation, proving that attempts to suppress expression often invite broader resistance and consequence. Through this modern lens, the story demonstrates how individual courage and resilience can spark collective action. The dress, transformed into a flaming symbol, represents the power of personal expression and the unforeseen consequences of attempting to silence those who assert themselves. The girl's experience is a testament to the principle that acts of oppression may ignite movements far larger than the initial act, and that creativity, courage, and visibility are forces that can inspire solidarity, awareness, and justice. The moral resonates across communities and generations. Attempts to silence, control, or humiliate those who assert their presence are rarely successful in the long term. Individual acts of self-expression can resonate far beyond their initial context, becoming catalysts for broader awareness, cultural dialogue, and even social transformation. The flames of the returned gown symbolize this truth, illustrating that expression and identity, when threatened, often emerge more potent, visible, and inspiring than before. The tale of the fiery dress became a narrative shared in news outlets, online forums, and local gatherings. It inspired debates about personal freedom, gender expression, and the consequences of envy and malice, while also offering a powerful example of how resilience and creative reclamation of one's voice can shift societal perceptions. By transforming humiliation into empowerment and turning an act of oppression into a symbol of resistance, the girl demonstrated that the assertion of identity is not only a personal victory but a collective inspiration. In the end, the fiery dress was no longer simply a garment, it became a movement, a statement, and a warning. It illustrated that attempts to silence expression may ignite broader resistance, that creativity and courage can transcend oppression, and that personal identity, when embraced fully, can inspire societal reflection, challenge norms, and demand accountability. In this modern protest narrative, the girl and her flaming gown remain immortalized as emblems of empowerment, resilience, and the enduring power of self-expression in the face of envy, malice, and control. In an unassuming village tucked between gentle hills and winding rivers, life flowed quietly, predictable and ordinary, punctuated only by the changing of seasons and the rhythmic work of its inhabitants. Among the villagers lived a young woman, seemingly ordinary like everyone else, yet there were subtle hints of something extraordinary about her. She moved with a quiet grace, noticing the smallest details in the world, and sometimes, just sometimes, her presence seemed to stir a soft, unexplainable energy, a shimmer in the air, a faint echo of sound where none should exist. Most villagers overlooked it, dismissing these small anomalies as tricks of the light or imagination, but they were signs of a latent, magical sensitivity. As the annual ball approached, the young woman prepared a gown, simple yet elegant, reflecting both her taste and her personality. But not all admired her preparation with goodwill. A few villagers, envious of her quiet charm and attentive to the undercurrents of her influence, decided to sabotage her. Under cover of night, they set her gown ablaze, reducing it to smoke and charred remnants. The act was cruel yet calculated, meant to publicly humiliate her and assert control over a girl who, in their eyes, had grown too prominent in a village that valued conformity. The next morning, the villagers awoke to an astonishing sight. From the ashes of the burned gown rose a flicker of fire, delicate and alive, moving without consuming, coalescing into the shape of the dress itself. The flames danced around the girl harmlessly, flowing as though directed by her presence. They shimmered with an otherworldly light, casting subtle colors across the village that no ordinary fire could produce. The villagers gasped, uncertain whether they were witnessing a miracle or some unknown magic. As days passed, the flames did more than simply adorn the girl. They carried faint whispers, echoes of old truths, or fragments of unspoken feelings. Dreams of the villagers were subtly influenced. Those who had acted maliciously awoke with uneasy sensations, moments of guilt or self-reflection, while those who observed her with admiration experienced fleeting glimpses of beauty, humility, and awe. The fire became a medium of subtle communication, linking the girl to the villagers in ways that were mysterious yet profoundly instructive. The girl moved through the village with quiet intention, never drawing overt attention to the flames, yet their presence followed her, highlighting her movements, emphasizing her gestures, and lending her an aura of enchantment that was unmistakable. No harm came from the fire, it neither burned her nor the earth beneath her feet. Instead, it seemed to protect her, an extension of the quiet power she had always carried. Ordinary tasks, a walk to the market, tending to chores, greeting neighbors, became imbued with the gentle hum of magic, as though the village itself had shifted in recognition of the injustice attempted against her. Those who had intended harm learned lessons both subtle and profound. Some felt an inexplicable shiver of conscience when encountering the flames, while others caught fleeting whispers urging reflection, kindness, or humility. The magical presence did not punish overtly but rather guided awareness, teaching the villagers that envy, malice, and cruelty left traces that the world, quiet, observant, and alive, would remember. The ordinary girl, through her subtle magical sensitivity, had become a conduit for a larger principle. Acts of injustice, no matter how small or hidden, are never truly lost or unnoticed. The moral of the tale, whispered through hushed conversations and remembered in stories shared by elders, became clear. The world remembers injustice in mysterious, magical ways. What is done in cruelty may return not as direct vengeance but as subtle, transformative signals, guiding understanding, humility, and respect. The flames of the return dress were not merely spectacular, they were instructive, a gentle, persistent reminder that ordinary actions have extraordinary consequences when viewed through the lens of the unseen, interconnected forces that shape the village and its people. Through seasons and years, the story of the girl and her fiery, enchanted gown became legend. Villagers spoke of the phenomenon as both wonder and warning, teaching children about kindness, envy, and the unseen ways in which the universe preserves balance. The girl herself continued to live her ordinary life, yet always with a quiet air of subtle power, her magical sensitivity intact, her presence amplified by the lessons imparted by the dancing flames. The village, once ordinary and predictable, was now tempered by humility and awe, forever changed by the extraordinary manifestation of justice and resilience that had emerged from a single act of cruelty. In the end, the tale endured as a story of magic woven into the mundane, a narrative that reminded all who heard it that the world observes, remembers, and responds to injustice, often in ways invisible but profoundly felt. The fiery dress became a symbol not only of the girl's resilience but also of the mysterious, interconnected forces that protect integrity, teach morality, and honor those who maintain grace in the face of adversity. Hear the tale of the fiery dress, a story that wins through the ages like smoke curling from a hearth, carried on the lips of those who know the weight of envy and the power of virtue. In a village nestled between hills and rivers, a young woman prepared for the grand ball, her heart filled with anticipation, her hands busy arranging every detail of the gown she would wear. It was a garment of silk and lace, a masterpiece of delicate embroidery and shimmering beads, reflecting not only her skill and taste but her very essence, her presence in a world that so often sought to suppress individuality. Each stitch was a testament to patience, care, and the right to be seen, a visible statement of identity and grace. Yet envy stalked in the shadows. A group of rivals, consumed by jealousy and eager to diminish her radiance, crept into her chambers under cover of darkness. With malicious intent, they set fire to the gown, reducing it to blackened ash and curling smoke. Their act was meant to humiliate, to strip her of dignity, and to assert dominance over what they could not possess or control. But fate, as ever in the weave of legend, had a different path prepared. From the ashes arose a transformation unlike any seen before. Flames twisted and danced into the shape of the destroyed gown, coalescing into a radiant garment that shimmered with magic and power. The fire was alive, yet harmless, embracing her with a glow that illuminated her features and filled the room with warmth and awe. The rivals froze, their eyes wide with fear and astonishment, as the dress moved with a life of its own, reflecting the strength and resilience of the girl it adorned. In that moment, they witnessed not merely a dress returned but divine justice enacted through the medium of fire, a spectacle that spoke of dignity reclaimed and courage triumphant. Word of the miraculous transformation spread quickly. Villagers gathered, gasping in awe at the radiant spectacle. Some fell to their knees in reverence, others whispered prayers of astonishment, and all felt the weight of justice in the air. The rivals, once confident in their cruelty, now trembled under the power of what they had sought to destroy. Their envy and malice were rendered impotent in the presence of the fiery dress, a tangible reminder that attempts to diminish virtue can never succeed against its inherent light. When the girl entered the grand hall that evening, the brilliance of her gown commanded attention. Flames swirled gently around her, trailing in her wake like a living aura, illuminating her movements and reflecting off the crystal chandeliers, casting rainbows upon the walls. The villagers and dignitaries of the region paused in collective astonishment. She moved with grace and confidence, unshaken by past cruelty, her triumph evident in every gesture. The rivals cowered in corners, powerless to undo the spell of awe that had been cast by what they had intended to destroy. Through her presence, the story of the fiery dress became legend. The gown, alive with flame, was more than fabric transformed. It symbolized the triumph of dignity over humiliation, courage over envy, and moral justice over petty malice. Observers understood that the flames were not mere spectacle, they were a message, a living metaphor for resilience, self-respect, and the indomitable spirit of those who face wrongdoing with integrity. The tale spread beyond the village to neighboring towns and kingdoms, sung by minstrels and recited by storytellers, carried on the wind like the flickering light of the dress itself. In the closing verses of the legend, the fiery dress was immortalized as both protector and emblem, a radiant garment that confounded cruelty, illuminated character, and carried the weight of retribution with elegance and power. Its flames became symbolic of the inner fire that no malice could extinguish, a force that ensured the triumph of virtue and the lasting memory of courage. Those who witnessed the story, whether in person or through retelling, understood that true power resides not in the acts of envy but in the unwavering grace and resilience of those who endure them. Thus, the epic of the fiery dress endured, echoing through generations, reminding all who heard it that dignity is inseparable from courage, that adversity may birth transformation, and that vengeance, when guided by justice, can manifest in the most luminous and awe-inspiring forms. The flames were eternal, a testament to the triumph of virtue over spite, the victory of the righteous, and the enduring glory of a young woman who walked unscathed through fire, leaving a legacy that would burn brightly in legend forevermore. Across cultures and throughout history, garments and fire have carried profound symbolic weight, often representing transformation, empowerment, or the administration of justice. In the tale of a young woman whose dress was burned before a grand ball, the returning flames can be understood not merely as a local miracle but as part of a larger, recurring motif in global folklore. Across continents, stories emerge in which destruction, whether of clothing, homes, or other personal symbols, catalyzes transcendence and reclamation of power, demonstrating a universal human fascination with the interplay between vulnerability and resilience. In European folklore, fire often signifies both purification and vengeance. Tales of enchanted garments, phoenix-like rebirths, or magical interventions resonate with the story of the fiery dress. The phoenix, consumed by flames only to rise renewed from its ashes, mirrors the girl's transformation. In some legends, garments themselves carry magical properties, protecting wearers or responding to acts of injustice, symbolizing that virtue and dignity cannot be destroyed by malicious intent. The return of the gown in flames reflects this archetype. Destruction intended to humiliate instead becomes the medium of empowerment, demonstrating a pattern recognized across cultural boundaries. Similarly, in Asian folklore, fire and clothing appear repeatedly as vehicles of both supernatural intervention and moral commentary. Stories of fire spirits punishing envy or guarding the innocent illustrate the way that elemental forces are often depicted as responsive to human emotion and ethics. A garment destroyed by envious hands may return enhanced or alive, a warning to transgressors and a vindication of the virtuous. These tales underscore the same dynamic observed in the village. Those who attempt to suppress or harm others frequently find that their actions provoke forces beyond their control, often resulting in symbolic or literal justice. In African and indigenous traditions, clothing and adornment frequently serve as markers of identity, status, and spiritual connection. Destroying such items, especially through public humiliation, is an act with profound psychological and social implications, reflecting attempts to erase agency or diminish power. Fire, in these contexts, may act as a transformative or protective force, restoring honor or empowering the wronged individual. Across cultures, then, the story of the fiery dress resonates as a narrative of resilience, illustrating that attempts to diminish identity through envy or humiliation often catalyze transcendence. The gender dynamics in these narratives are striking. Women, in particular, have historically been subjected to social control through mechanisms of shame, whether through public scrutiny, forced clothing alterations, or symbolic erasure. From European witch trials to social exile, from the destruction of ceremonial garments in indigenous rituals to modern critiques of female presentation and agency, the use of clothing as a tool of control is recurrent. The fiery dress story aligns with these traditions. The malicious act of burning the gown embodies envy and the attempt to suppress a woman's visibility, while the miraculous return demonstrates the futility of such efforts and the power of reclaiming one's identity. Across all these cultural variations, a recurring motif emerges: destruction precedes transformation. Whether fire consumes a phoenix, a spirit animates a garment, or a socially humiliating act rebounds through magical or psychological means, the pattern remains consistent. Loss or injury, when confronted with inner strength, moral clarity, or supernatural intervention, becomes the catalyst for transcendence. This pattern reinforces universal moral lessons about resilience, dignity, and justice, that even acts meant to humiliate or diminish may be transformed into sources of empowerment, visibility, and moral clarity. The story also emphasizes the psychological dimensions of witnessing and complicity. Across cultures, observers of injustice, whether neighbors, family members, or societal authorities, play a role in the narrative, and the miraculous return of the dress signals a correction not only for the victim but for those who were passive or complicit. The flames serve as both vindication and lesson, illustrating the broader social consequences of envy and cruelty. By aligning the story with myths and folklore globally, it becomes clear that the tale is not merely a local phenomenon but a reflection of enduring human concerns: the need to assert identity, resist oppression, and witness moral balance restored. Ultimately, the story of the fiery dress functions as a bridge across cultures and time. It draws upon motifs recognized in European, Asian, African, and indigenous folklore, combining themes of fire, magical garments, and transformative justice to convey a narrative about empowerment, identity, and resilience. The flames, dancing around the girl and returning her dignity, are emblematic of universal truths, that destruction can give birth to strength, that envy and cruelty often backfire, and that moral and personal integrity, once threatened, may emerge more radiant than before. Through this lens, the moral of the tale transcends its immediate setting. It demonstrates that resilience, self-expression, and identity are not fragile, and that cultural and historical patterns consistently celebrate the triumph of those who endure, resist, and reclaim power after acts of malice. The fiery dress thus stands as a universal symbol, the intersection of personal dignity, justice, and transcendence, a reminder that the forces of envy and cruelty cannot permanently diminish those who rise from their trials with courage and grace.